Okay, so you have your test tomorrow. It's on chapter 1. The test is going to cover 1.2, 1.4, and 1.5. My advice to you is focus on all of the techniques in 1.4, and we learned 4 different ways to solve. We either solved by factoring, we solved by using the square root method, we learned how to complete the square, and then we also learned the quadratic formula. Now, we also solved linear equations in section 1.2. So from 1.2, this is the linear, and it was also the rational. I would focus my studying on 1.4, okay, and 1.5. Now that we've learned about complex numbers, whenever you get a negative number under the square root, you're no longer going to say no solution. You can solve that, and you will get an I in your answer. The only time you're going to get a no solution or an all real number right now is when you have the linear. The quadratics you can solve now. Anything with an x squared or an x cubed, we can solve those because we now know about imaginary numbers. So on the test tomorrow, there's going to be 13 questions. It's actually set up just like these 2 reviews. So for example, it's going to have only 3 questions, 3 main parts, and it's going to say to solve it or to simplify or whatever it is. So it's going to have like number 1, and it'll have A, B, and C. Number 2, A, B, C, D, E, F. It'll be grouped like that. Now, for the section 1.4, there are going to be there's going to be questions where it's going to specify which one of these to use. And then there's other questions where it's just going to say solve. So if it does not say solve using quadratic formula or solve using completing the square, you must solve the problem that way. If you solve it using any other technique, you get it wrong, even if you get the right answer. Pretty clear on that? So if the question says, solve this question, and it says, solve this by completing the square, and you use quadratic formula, you just got it wrong. So whatever method it tells you to use, you must use it to get the points for the question. Even if you have the right answer, it's wrong. There will be other questions from 1.4 where you get to choose. And the only instructions it's going to say is solve. Yes, Bradley. So if you think about it, 1.2a, that was linear. 1.2b, that was the rational. And then 1.4a, that was solving by factoring and square root. 1.4b was the completing the square. 1.4c was the quadratic formula. And then 1.5a, that's where we were learning about the complex numbers. And then 1.5b, this is where we were solving. And we were using the techniques in 1.4, but the only difference is we had I's in the answer. So that's just a little overview of what all of the lessons are. So maybe you're struggling with one, go back to those notes. So you already have this one. All of these problems are in the file that says quadratic practice. Then I posted another one that says test review. And again, notice how it's got solved by factoring, completing the square, solved by square roots, solve for x. So again, it's just going to say solve, and when you get questions like this, you can use whatever method you want. All of this stuff, the only difference is you get i's in the answer. All right, so what we're going to do for the rest of the class is, if you need help, I've already posted all the solutions for all of these. So any of these that you don't know how to do or you want to see me do them, I'll work them out. Or if there's anything from any of the web assigns that I have given you, I can work those out as well. So what I want you to do, because this is a lot of information and a lot of practice problems, if you haven't started doing them, maybe start doing one from each one of the sections. Do from 1, do 1 from 2, 3, and so on. And if you're getting stuck and you're not getting the answers, ask me and I'll work it out. 13 questions tomorrow. Be able to work rapidly. Because remember, the ones that are involving completing the square, you got to do it pretty quick. And I know somebody asked me yesterday, what if they say use completing the square? Could I use another technique like quadratic formula to check my answer? Absolutely. You can use any one of the 4 techniques. Sometimes if it's something that's factorable, you could use all 4 techniques to do it. If it's not factorable, then you have to do completing the square or quadratic formula. You don't have a choice if it's not factorable. All right, anybody need to see any of these worked out or any web assigns? So this is 4E. So again, I need to move the 27 over. I need to have my equation equal to 0. And then now what I'm going to do, because if you just solve it like it is and cube root it, you're only going to get the real answer. You're going to miss out on the imaginary. So for the cubes, you need to make them equal to 0. And now I'm going to do my SOAP pattern. Cube root of x cubed, cube root of 27. And now I do the trinomial pattern. Square the x, multiply the 3 and the x, and then always positive, square that 3. Now again, we set each of these equal to 0. So I've got my real answer, x equals 3. But now for the trinomial, this is where I need to do completing the square or quadratic formula. Yesterday in the notes, I just did quadratic formula. My a is 1. My b is 3. My c is 9. Negative 3 plus or minus 3 squared minus 4 times a times c, all under the radical, and then 2 times a. Negative 3 plus or minus 9 minus 36. 9 minus 36 is going to give me 27. Let's see, 36 minus 9 gives me negative 27. Again, don't try to simplify anything until you break down the radical first. So I can break this into negative 1 times 27, and then 9 and 3. So then this becomes 3i, radical 3. So negative 3 plus or minus 3i, radical 3 over 2. I think this might have been one that I did yesterday. So again, common mistakes, and I'm going to warn you now, our students are going to take this problem the way it's written, and they're going to think, oh, I can just do this, cube root it. All you get if you do that is going to be the real solution. You'll lose out on the imaginary, and you're going to get the whole thing wrong. Okay? You might get 1 point for getting the real solution, but you must set it equal to 0. I can't stress that enough. And then the last part, this is the chapter or the 1.5 stuff. This is actually the 1.5a. Okay, the 1.5b is all right. This is number 11. Still from 1.5b, 5 plus -5, 6 minus negative root 10. Was that the question? Okay. So what I need to do here is FOIL this thing. So I can go ahead and multiply 5 times 6. And what I'm also going to do is pull out, and I'm going to change this to an I radical 5, I radical 10. So then now when I do outside, I'm going to get negative 5I radical 10. And then inside is going to be positive 6I radical 5. And then last, I'm going to get negative I squared and then radical 50. But I'm going to have to break down that 50. And I could break the 50 into 25 and 2. So 5 radical 2. So then, let's see what we got here. So 30 minus 5I radical 10 plus 6I radical 5. I'm going to also change this to a negative 1. So this negative negative will become plus 5 radical 2. So then now what we can do is, you need to move this up here by the 30. And then we've got these guys still. So all I did was move this to the front. But then what they did was they factored out an I out of these. So the way that they had the answer written, 5 radical 2, let me fix that, is they had plus I, and they put the 6 first. 6 radical 5 plus, no, minus 5 radical 10. That's how they wanted it entered. The way you have your answer, I would give you credit. Okay, does that make sense? But they factored out a GCF of I on all those. I don't know. All right, any other ones? Yes. Number 3, same homework? Yeah. 1.5b? Okay. Let me look for yours. Okay. All right, number 3, same homework, 1.5b. And let's see what we got here. Okay, so it's 3I over 5 minus 9I squared. Is that your question? Yeah. Okay. So first thing I need to do is I need to get rid of that I in the denominator. If I multiply by its conjugate, I need to change the sign. So 5 plus 9I. Okay, so also you should know the cube pattern. All right, so this is the last question back here for 1.5b. So x squared plus 8x plus 17 equals 0. Is that the question? Yeah. Okay, so obviously there are not any factors of 17 that will give me 8. So at this point, since I can't factor it or use the square root method, I need to solve this. Oh, they told me to use quadratic formula. So it says to use the quadratic formula in the question. I didn't read that. So I'm going to use quadratic formula. So my A is 1, my B is 8, my C is 17. So I'm going to plug it into the formula. Opposite of B, plus or minus, B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A. Negative 8 plus or minus 64, and then 4 times 17 gives me 68. 2 times 1 is 2. Negative 8 plus or minus 64 minus 68 is negative 4. I need to simplify the radical first. Do not be tempted to simplify the 8 and the 2 right now. Break down the radical first. So I can simplify the negative 4 into plus or minus 2i over 2. And now I can simplify. 2 goes into 2 once. 2 goes into the 8 4 times. Final answer, negative 4 plus or minus I. WebAssign made you pull it apart. So negative 4 minus I, comma, negative 4 plus I. I'm okay with you leaving it just like that. Again, focus on 1-4 and how to deal with the I's from 1-5. And also remember, you need to memorize that cube pattern. Those were the last 2 examples I did in the notes yesterday. Remember, normally when you factor the cube, we could never factor the trinomial that was formed, but now that we know how to use the quadratic formula in completing the square, we can now solve that trinomial. Remember, for the cubes, you're going to have a real answer and 2 imaginary answers. Do not leave off any of those answers. There's some in the review. Yeah. So this is number 12, still from 1.5b. And the question is, okay, this is a good one because you've got fractions here. And let me go through this. Okay, 7/8 x squared minus 3/4 x plus 5/16 equals 0. Now, the instruction said use quadratic formula. When I did this in the notes, I told you last year and probably every year that we've done this, we always like to give you questions that have fractions in it and tell you to use quadratic formula. Do not attempt to put an a equals 7/8, a b equals negative 3/4. You will have a nightmare on your hands. You need to clear the fractions first. I'm going to multiply this entire equation by its common denominator to get rid of the fraction first. My common denominator here is going to be 16. So I'm going to multiply every piece of this by 16. And I'll put it right up above it just so I can see what cancels. The 8 and the 16, this becomes a 2. So this becomes a 14x squared. Simplify this. This becomes a 12x. Simplify this. Plus 5. And then 16 times 0 is 0. Now I've got something so much easier to put into the quadratic formula. Trust me, if you get this question on the test tomorrow and you try to work with it as fractions, you're going to spend a good portion of your test trying to do this. Get rid of the fraction. So my A is 14. My B is negative 12. My C is 5. Now I can plug it into the formula. So I'm going to get opposite of B, so 12 plus or minus negative 12 squared minus 4 times A times C, all under the radical, and then 2 times A, which is 14. 12 plus or minus 144, and then 20 times 14 is going to give me 280, and then 2 times 14 gives me 28. I now need to subtract what's under the radical, and I get negative 136 over 28. Do not be tempted to simplify that 12 and 28 yet. I need to break down the square root of 136. So 136 negative becomes a negative 1. And actually, I can divide it by 4, and I get 34. So this is actually going to become 2i square root 34. So 12 plus or minus 2i square root 34 over 28. Now I simplify. So I can change the 12 to a 6, the 28 to a 14, and the 2 to a 1. And now my final answer is going to be 6 plus or minus I radical 34 over 14. And they wanted you to pull it apart, but again, on the test tomorrow, leave it just like that. Any other ones? Tomorrow when you're taking the test, if you come to a question that you don't know how to do or it's too challenging, skip it. Keep going. Okay? This class doesn't give you the luxury to sit there and think about a question for 10 minutes. If you do, you will not finish the test. So always, and this is a good test-taking strategy for any class, whenever you encounter a question you don't know how to do or you blank out, skip it. Keep going. Okay? Chances are you might remember how to do it after you get rid of that anxiety from that one question and you keep moving. Okay? Don't get stuck on something and then think, oh no, it's impossible. I will be here today after school till 3, and I will also be here tomorrow morning to answer any questions you may have.